I was standing in my driveway at 5 in the morning when I realized my de-icing truck was gone, and the temperature was already dropping below freezing with an ice storm warning plastered across every weather channel in northern Michigan. My name is Victor Ellsworth, and I run a small private snow and ice removal company that services the Willow Creek residential community and the surrounding areas, including the critical bridge that connects our neighborhood to the mainland over the frozen Cascade River. Without that truck, I had no way to keep the roads safe, and judging by the sleet already beginning to coat my windshield, we were about to have a serious problem. I pulled out my phone and called the non-emergency police line, figuring maybe it had been stolen. The dispatcher, a tired-sounding woman named Marie, told me to hold while she checked recent tow reports. My stomach dropped when she came back on the line. "Sir, looks like your vehicle was towed by Murphy's Towing at the request of the Willow Creek HOA. Says here it was parked in violation of community regulations." "What regulations? I live here. That truck was in my own driveway." "You will have to take that up with your HOA, sir. The tow company is located at 4850 Industrial Drive. They open at 7. I hung up and immediately dialed Patricia Henderson, the HOA president. Patricia was exactly what you would expect from someone who volunteered to run a homeowner association with an iron fist. She was 52, had the haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," and she treated the HOA bylaws like they were the 10 Commandments handed down from God himself. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up, her voice groggy and annoyed. "Do you know what time it is? Do you know where my de-icing truck is?" There was a pause. "Oh, that eyesore. Yes, I had it towed last night. It was violating Section 8, Paragraph 3 of the Community Guidelines. Commercial vehicles are not permitted to be parked in residential driveways overnight." I felt my blood pressure spike. "Patricia, that truck is essential equipment. We have an ice storm coming in right now. I need that truck to keep the bridge safe." "Then you should have parked it at a proper commercial facility instead of lowering our property values." "The rules are the rules, Victor. The bridge is going to ice over. People need to get to work, to the hospital, to school. That bridge is the only way in or out of this community. I am sure the county will handle it. Now, if you excuse me, some of us need our beauty sleep. You can retrieve your vehicle from the impound after you pay the fees. Good night." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there in my driveway, sleet turning to freezing rain, watching it create a crystalline shell over everything it touched. The weather forecast had been clear about this for 3 days. This was going to be one of the worst ice storms in years, the kind that shuts down entire regions and makes roads into skating rinks. I got into my personal truck, a regular Ford F-150 that had none of the de-icing equipment I needed, and headed toward the impound lot. The drive took 20 minutes, and with every mile, I watched the roads get worse. The freezing rain was coming down steadily now, and even with 4-wheel drive, I could feel my tires struggling for traction. Murphy's Towing was a grim industrial building surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. I pulled up to the gate at exactly 7 and found a young guy in a grease-stained jacket unlocking the entrance. "I am here for my truck. White Silverado with de-icing equipment towed from Willow Creek last night." He checked his clipboard. "Yeah, got it. That will be $450, cash or card." $450, emergency tow after hours fee storage. You want it or not? I pulled out my credit card, fuming. I could not afford to argue. Every minute that truck sat here was another minute the roads were getting worse. He processed the payment with agonizing slowness, then led me through the muddy lot to where my truck sat between a Honda with a smashed front end and a rusty Dodge that looked like it had been there for years. I did a quick inspection. Everything looked intact. The tank was still half full of calcium chloride solution, the spray bars were undamaged, and the engine started on the first try. Small mercies. I drove it out of the lot and immediately headed back toward Willow Creek, but I made a detour first to check on the bridge. The Cascade River Bridge was a 2-lane structure built in 1987. Nothing fancy but critical infrastructure for the nearly 800 families who lived in Willow Creek. The community had been built on what was essentially a peninsula, with the river creating a natural boundary on 3 sides. The bridge was the only vehicle access point, and it had a known problem with ice accumulation due to the way wind funneled through the river valley. When I pulled up to the approach, I could already see the problem developing. The bridge deck was covered in a thin sheet of ice, and freezing rain continued to fall. I got out and carefully walked onto the bridge, testing each step. It was slick, seriously slick. This was exactly the condition that led to pile-ups and injuries. I got back in my truck and began the de-icing process, starting at the far end and working my way back. The spray bars distributed the calcium chloride solution evenly across the bridge deck, and I made 3 passes to ensure good coverage. It took me an hour and a half to properly treat the bridge and the approaches on both sides. By the time I finished, it was almost 9 in the morning, and I had already received 6 phone calls from residents asking when I would get to their streets. I spent the rest of the morning working through Willow Creek, treating the main arteries first, then the side streets. The subdivision had roughly 12 miles of roads, and under normal circumstances, I could treat them all in about 4 hours. But these were not normal circumstances. I had lost critical time, and the freezing rain had not stopped. Around noon, I got a call from Gerald Martinez, one of the residents who lived near the bridge entrance. "Victor, you need to see this. There has been an accident on the bridge." I dropped what I was doing and headed back. When I arrived, I found 2 cars that had collided near the center span. Nobody appeared seriously hurt, but both vehicles had significant damage. A silver Lexus had rear-ended a blue Subaru, and both drivers were standing on the shoulder, exchanging information while trying not to slip on the ice that had reformed. The Subaru driver, a middle-aged man in a business suit, looked furious. "This bridge is a death trap. Where is the de-icing? Why is nobody maintaining this?" "I treated this bridge 3 hours ago," I said, walking up carefully, "but the freezing rain has been constant. The treatment can only do so much before it gets overwhelmed." "Well, do it again. I am working on it right now. Is everyone okay? Do you need me to call for medical?" The Lexus driver, a younger woman, shook her head. "We are fine, just shaken up, but he is right. This bridge should not be in this condition." I spent the next 45 minutes treating the bridge again while the 2 drivers waited for the police to arrive and file an accident report. Officer Brandon Wells showed up around 1, took statements, and then pulled me aside. "Victor, I have been getting calls all morning about road conditions in Willow Creek. What is going on? Usually, you are on top of this stuff." I explained about the towing, about Patricia Henderson and the HOA, about losing those critical early morning hours when I should have been pre-treating everything. Brandon listened, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "So you are telling me the HOA towed your de-icing equipment during an ice storm?" "That is exactly what I am telling you." He shook his head. "That is incredibly stupid. Do they not understand what you do? Patricia seems to think the county will handle it." "The county?" Brandon actually laughed. "The county has 2 trucks covering a service area of over 300 square miles. They are not going to prioritize a private community bridge. That has always been your job." "I know that. You know that. Apparently, Patricia Henderson does not know that. Brandon looked at the two damaged cars, then at the bridge deck, which was already starting to glaze over again despite my recent treatment. This is going to get worse before it gets better. The weather service is saying this freezing rain is going to continue through tonight and into tomorrow morning. He was right. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a losing battle against the ice. I would treat a section of road, move on to the next area, and by the time I circled back, the first section would be icing over again. The temperature was hovering right at 31 degrees, that perfect range where freezing rain is most dangerous. It was not cold enough for snow, which would actually provide some traction, but cold enough that every drop of rain froze on contact. By 4 in the afternoon, I had received 17 phone calls from residents complaining about road conditions. By 5, the number had climbed to 23. And at 5:30, Patricia Henderson called me. "Victor, I have been receiving complaints about the roads. People are saying they cannot get home safely. What are you doing about this?" I had to count to 10 before responding. "What am I doing?" "I am working non-stop to undo the damage caused when you had my truck towed during an ice storm. Patricia, do not take that tone with me. The HOA pays you to maintain these roads and you are not doing your job." I lost 4 critical hours this morning, 4 hours when I should have been treating everything before the worst of the storm hit. And I am one person with one truck trying to cover 12 miles of roads during continuous freezing rain. I am doing everything I can. Well, it is not good enough. The bridge is a mess. Sharon Whitmore just called me. She said her husband nearly slid off the road trying to come home from work. I have treated that bridge 4 times today. It needs to be treated every hour in these conditions, but I cannot be in 2 places at once. I have side streets that are completely impassable right now. Then hire more people, buy more trucks, figure it out. That is what we pay you for. The sheer ignorance of that statement left me speechless. Patricia, I am a small private contractor. I do not have a fleet. I have one truck, which would have been perfectly adequate if I had not lost the entire morning because you had it towed for cosmetic reasons. Do not blame this on me. I enforce the rules fairly and equally for all residents. People are going to get hurt. That bridge is dangerous right now, and it is only going to get worse overnight. Then I suggest you work through the night." She hung up. I sat in my truck, exhausted and frustrated, and watched the freezing rain continue to fall. The sky was already darkening and the temperature was dropping. Overnight, this was going to become exponentially worse. I called my girlfriend, Fiona Brooks. She lived in town, about 15 miles away from Willow Creek, and she worked as a nurse at Cascade Regional Hospital. We had been dating for 2 years, and she was one of the few people who understood the insane pressure that came with my job during winter weather events. "How bad is it?" she asked when she picked up. "Bad, really bad. The HOA towed my truck last night and I lost the whole morning. Now I am fighting a losing battle." "They towed your truck during an ice storm. Are they insane?" Apparently, it was violating their aesthetic standards. Fiona was quiet for a moment. "Victor, you need to document everything. Every call, every conversation, every time you treat that bridge. If someone gets seriously hurt, the HOA is going to try to pin it on you." She was right. I started keeping detailed notes on my phone, logging every treatment, every call, every conversation. At 6, I treated the bridge for the 5th time. At 7, I got a call about a car that had slid into a ditch on Maple Street. At 8, another accident on the bridge, this time a pickup truck that had lost control and hit the guardrail. The driver was shaken but uninjured. His truck had a nasty dent in the passenger side and a broken headlight. "I was only going 20 miles per hour, he told me. I touched the brakes, and the whole truck just started spinning. What the hell is wrong with this bridge? I explained about the ice, about the treatment, about the impossible task of keeping up with continuous freezing rain. He was not satisfied, and I could not blame him. The bridge should have been safer than this. Under normal circumstances, it would have been. At 9, I got a call from Patricia again. "Victor, there have been 3 accidents on the bridge today. This is completely unacceptable." "I am aware. I responded to 2 of them personally. The HOA board is considering terminating your contract." That actually made me laugh, a harsh, bitter sound. "Terminate it then. See how well that works out for you in the middle of an ice storm. Do not test me. I am trying to give you a chance to fix this situation." The situation would not exist if you had not had my truck towed. I should have been treating everything at 5 this morning. Instead, I was at an impound lot. That truck was in violation of community standards. Those community standards might end up getting someone killed, Patricia. Have you thought about that? What happens when someone slides off that bridge into the river? What happens when there is a multi-car pile-up? Your precious property values are not going to matter much then. Are you threatening me? I am trying to make you understand the reality of the situation. This is not about aesthetics. This is about safety. And right now, Willow Creek is not safe. Then make it safe. That is your job. I hung up on her this time. I was too tired and too frustrated to continue the conversation. I treated the bridge for the 6th time, then drove through the subdivision checking conditions. Every road was a sheet of ice. Mailboxes were knocked over where cars had slid off the pavement. Tree branches, weighted down with ice, were sagging dangerously low over the streets. At midnight, I finally went home for a few hours of sleep. I set an alarm for 4 in the morning, knowing I would need to start all over again. The freezing rain had finally stopped, but the damage was done. Everything was coated in a thick layer of ice, and the temperature was still below freezing. When my alarm went off, I dragged myself out of bed, made coffee, and headed back out. The bridge was my first priority. In the pale glow of my truck's work lights, I could see that the ice had built up substantially overnight. Even with the calcium chloride treatment, there was a slick glaze across the entire span. I was halfway through my second treatment pass when I heard a loud crack, followed by a groaning sound that made my blood run cold. I stopped the truck and got out, listening. The sound was coming from the bridge itself, and it was not normal. I walked carefully to the edge and looked over at the support structure below. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see the problem. Ice had accumulated on the steel support beams and cable stays, adding thousands of pounds of extra weight to a structure that was not designed to handle it. Worse, I could see stress fractures in several of the concrete support pillars, where the expansion and contraction from the temperature changes had caused damage. I immediately called the County Public Works Department. At 4:30 in the morning, I got an answering service, but I made it clear this was an emergency. 20 minutes later, I got a call back from Ethan Price, the county engineer. "Talk to me," he said, and I could hear him moving around, clearly getting ready to head out. I explained what I was seeing. He asked me to send photos, which I did, using every light I had to illuminate the structural problems. There was a long pause after he received them. "Shut the bridge down. Right now. Do not let anyone on it. I do not have the authority to close a county bridge." "I am giving you the authority. I am calling the sheriff's department right now. They will send someone to set up barricades. That bridge is unsafe. The ice loading combined with those stress fractures makes it a collapse risk." My stomach dropped. How bad are we talking? Bad enough that I do not want any weight on it until we can get a full structural assessment. I will be out there by 7, but until then, that bridge is closed. I called Brandon Wells directly on his cell. He answered on the third ring, sounding alert despite the early hour. "Victor." "What is wrong?" I explained the situation. He cursed quietly. "I will be there in 15 minutes with barricades. But you know this is going to cause chaos, right? That bridge is the only way in or out of Willow Creek." "I know, but the county engineer says it is a collapse risk." "We do not have a choice." Brandon arrived 13 minutes later with another officer and a truck full of barricades and warning signs. We set them up on both approaches to the bridge, creating a hard closure. Brandon used his patrol car's PA system to make an announcement, but at 5 in the morning most people were still asleep. That changed quickly. By 6, the calls started coming in. Residents trying to leave for work, trying to get to the hospital, trying to take kids to school. They were all met with barricades and police officers turning them away. By 6:30, there was a line of vehicles backed up on both sides of the bridge, and people were getting out of their cars, demanding to know what was going on. At 7, Patricia Henderson showed up. She pulled her white Mercedes right up to the barricade and got out, marching toward Brandon like a woman on a mission. "What is the meaning of this? Why is the bridge closed?" Brandon, to his credit, remained professional. "The bridge is structurally unsound due to ice loading and stress damage. It is closed until the county engineer completes a safety assessment." "That is ridiculous. I drove across this bridge just yesterday." "That was yesterday. Today, it is a potential collapse hazard." Patricia turned to me. "This is your fault. If you had been doing your job, the bridge would not have iced over." I felt something snap inside me. "My job? Patricia, my truck was sitting in an impound lot at 5 yesterday morning because you had it towed. I should have been treating this bridge before the ice storm even started. Every problem we are having right now is a direct result of that decision. Do not blame me for your incompetence." Incompetence? I treated that bridge 6 times yesterday, 6 times in continuous freezing rain. But it was not enough because I lost those critical morning hours when I should have been pre-treating everything. Ethan Price arrived in the middle of our argument. He was a tall man in his 50s with a no-nonsense attitude and the kind of weathered face that came from years of working outside. He took one look at the crowd forming around the barricades and held up his hands. "Everyone, please step back. I need to conduct a structural assessment of this bridge, and I need the area clear to do it safely." Patricia was not having it. "How long is this going to take? People need to get to work. Children need to get to school." "It is going to take as long as it takes, madam. Bridge safety is not something we rush. This is completely unacceptable. I am calling the county commissioner. You do that. In the meantime, this bridge stays closed." Ethan spent the next 2 hours inspecting the bridge, taking measurements, documenting the ice buildup and the structural damage. I watched from the sidelines as the crowd grew increasingly restless. Some people gave up and went home. Others called in sick to work or arranged for kids to stay home from school. A few started yelling at the police officers, as if they could somehow change the structural integrity of concrete and steel through sheer force of anger. At 9:15, Ethan finished his inspection and called for a meeting with Brandon, Patricia, and me. We stood in a circle near his truck while he delivered the news. The bridge is in bad shape. The ice loading was the trigger, but there were underlying structural issues that have been developing for a while. The expansion joints are failing, several of the support cables have corrosion damage, and those stress fractures in the concrete are worse than they look. This bridge needs immediate repairs, and until those are done, it cannot be opened. Patricia went pale. "What do you mean, immediate repairs? How long will that take?" I am estimating at least 2 weeks, possibly longer depending on what we find when we start the work. 2 weeks. That is impossible. 800 families depend on this bridge. Ethan shrugged. I understand that, but I am not going to sign off on opening a bridge that might collapse. You will need to find alternative arrangements. What alternative arrangements? That bridge is the only way in or out. There is a service road that runs along the river. It is unpaved and adds about 20 minutes to the drive, but it is usable. We will set up signs directing traffic to it. I watched Patricia's face cycle through several emotions: shock, denial, anger, and finally a kind of panicked realization. This is a disaster. Property values are going to plummet. People are going to sue. The HOA board is going to crucify me. Maybe you should have thought about that before you had my de-icing truck towed, I said quietly. She turned on me, eyes blazing. You are going to take responsibility for this. You are the contractor. You were supposed to maintain that bridge. I maintained it 6 times yesterday, but that bridge has been deteriorating for years, and the ice storm pushed it over the edge. The county engineer just said there were underlying structural issues. Those have nothing to do with my de-icing work. Ethan interrupted. He is right. The structural problems are separate from the ice situation. The ice just made them visible and created an immediate safety hazard. But this bridge has been in need of repair for a while. My department has been recommending upgrades for the past 3 years, but they have not been funded. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but Ethan was not someone she could bully. He was a county official with the power to keep that bridge closed indefinitely, and she knew it. Over the next few hours, chaos reigned in Willow Creek. The service road that Ethan had mentioned was barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass each other, and it quickly became clogged with traffic. People who normally had a 5-minute commute to the highway were now facing a 30-minute detour through muddy, unpaved roads. Emergency services had to be notified that response times to Willow Creek would be significantly delayed. And Patricia Henderson became the most unpopular person in the subdivision. I was at home, finally getting something to eat, when my phone started blowing up with messages. There was a group chat for Willow Creek residents, and someone had shared the whole story. How Patricia had my truck towed the night before the ice storm, how I had lost critical treatment time, how the bridge had iced over and started deteriorating. The messages came fast and furious. People were furious with Patricia, demanding her resignation, threatening legal action. Someone discovered that the HOA bylaws actually had a provision allowing for emergency equipment parking, which meant Patricia had violated the rules herself by having my truck towed. At 2 in the afternoon, I got a call from Harold Chen, one of the HOA board members. Harold was a retired accountant, a reasonable guy who had never been one of Patricia's cheerleaders. "Victor, I owe you an apology. The board just had an emergency meeting and we reviewed what happened. Patricia acted unilaterally in having your truck towed. She did not consult with the rest of the board, and she violated our own emergency equipment provisions. I appreciate that, Harold. We are removing her as president, effective immediately. The board is also going to cover your towing fees and any lost revenue from yesterday, and we want to make it clear that you did everything you could under impossible circumstances. Thank you. That means a lot. There is more. Several residents are talking about filing a lawsuit against Patricia personally for the bridge situation. I do not know if it will go anywhere, but people are angry. I could not say I felt sorry for her. Her stubborn adherence to aesthetic rules over common sense had created a genuine crisis. The bridge was going to be closed for weeks, causing massive inconvenience and potentially dangerous delays for emergency services. And all of it could have been avoided if she had just let me do my job. The rest of that day was a blur of phone calls and damage control. The county brought in contractors to start emergency repairs on the bridge. The local news picked up the story, and by evening, it was making headlines. HOA president's decision leads to bridge closure, stranding hundreds of families. A reporter named Jessica Reynolds from Channel 7 News called me for an interview. I agreed, and she showed up at my house with a cameraman at 6 that evening. I explained everything: the ice storm warning, the towing of my truck, the impossible battle to keep up with treatment, and the eventual bridge closure. So you are saying the HOA president had your de-icing equipment towed in the middle of an ice storm? Jessica asked, clearly not believing what she was hearing. That is correct. She said it was violating community standards by being parked in my driveway. Even though you needed it to maintain the roads and bridge, even though. The story aired that night at 11 and it went viral. By morning, it had been picked up by national news outlets. Patricia Henderson became the face of out-of-control HOA overreach, and Willow Creek became a cautionary tale about what happens when bureaucratic petness overrides common sense. 3 days after the bridge closure, I got a visit from the Michigan Attorney General's office. Special Agent Linda Morrison showed up at my door with a briefcase and a serious expression. "Mr. Ellsworth, I am investigating the Willow Creek Bridge incident. I would like to ask you some questions." I invited her in and spent the next hour going through everything in detail. She took extensive notes, asked pointed questions about the timeline, and requested copies of all my documentation. What kind of investigation are we talking about? I asked when we were done. We are looking into potential criminal negligence. Your HOA president's actions directly contributed to a public safety hazard. The bridge closure has affected emergency services access to over 800 families. If someone had died because of delayed emergency response during that closure, Miss Henderson could have been facing manslaughter charges. I felt a chill run down my spine. I had not thought about it in those terms, but Linda was right. If someone had a heart attack or a stroke during those critical hours when the bridge was closed, and the delayed ambulance response meant they died, Patricia's decision to tow my truck could have been directly responsible. Additionally, Linda continued, we are looking at the towing itself. Miss Henderson appears to have violated your HOA's own bylaws, which could constitute fraud or abuse of authority. She used HOA funds to pay for a tow that was not legally justified. Over the next week, the investigation expanded. Linda's office interviewed Patricia, the other HOA board members, the towing company, and dozens of Willow Creek residents. They subpoenaed HOA records and communications, and they discovered something interesting. Patricia had a history of using her position to settle personal grudges. She had filed complaints against residents she did not like, had their vehicles towed, and had even tried to force architectural changes on homes when the owners disagreed with her on other matters. The de-icing truck incident was just the most dramatic example of a pattern of behavior. 2 weeks after the bridge closure, Patricia Henderson was arrested and charged with criminal negligence, abuse of authority, and misappropriation of HOA funds. The arrest happened at 9 in the morning, and by noon, every news outlet in Michigan was covering it. The story had everything: an out-of-control HOA president, a preventable disaster, and a dramatic arrest. I watched the news coverage from my living room, Fiona sitting beside me. They showed footage of Patricia being led out of her house in handcuffs, her face a mask of shock and anger. They replayed the interview I had done, explaining how my truck had been towed. They showed images of the closed bridge, the long lines of cars forced to use the service road, and the structural repairs underway. "You feel vindicated?" Fiona asked me. I thought about it. Vindicated is not the right word. I feel like justice is being done, I guess. But I am also thinking about all the people who were affected. The accidents on the bridge, the families who could not get to work or school, the emergency response delays. None of that should have happened. The bridge reopened 3 weeks after the initial closure. The county had fast-tracked the repairs, bringing in additional contractors and working around the clock. The final bill came to just over $800,000, paid for by a combination of county emergency funds and federal infrastructure grants. Patricia Henderson pleaded guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and a permanent ban from serving in any HOA leadership position. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the HOA for the misappropriated funds. The Willow Creek HOA underwent a complete restructuring. Harold Chen became the new president, and the board implemented new policies requiring board approval for any enforcement actions over $500. They also created specific exemptions for emergency equipment and essential business vehicles. As for me, I got my $450 back from the towing fees, plus an additional $5,000 from the HOA to compensate for lost revenue and the stress of the situation. More importantly, I never had to worry about Patricia Henderson again. The story became legendary in HOA circles. I started getting calls from other communities, asking me to speak at their board meetings, explaining the importance of common sense in enforcement and the dangers of overzealous rule application. I even consulted with a state legislator who was drafting a bill to create oversight mechanisms for HOA boards and prevent similar situations. But the biggest change was in Willow Creek itself. The residents, having experienced firsthand what happens when an HOA goes too far, became much more engaged in community governance. Board meetings went from sparsely attended formalities to packed events where people actually paid attention to what was being decided. The bylaws were reviewed and updated, removing dozens of petty rules that served no real purpose. 6 months after the bridge incident, I was driving my de-icing truck through Willow Creek on a clear summer day, heading to a routine maintenance check on the equipment. As I passed Patricia Henderson's house, I noticed a for sale sign in the yard. She was moving, unable to withstand the social pressure and constant reminders of her actions. Part of me felt a little sorry for her, but mostly I just felt relief. I pulled into my driveway, the same driveway where my truck had been parked that night in January, and sat for a moment, thinking about everything that had happened. The ice storm, the bridge closure, the investigation, the arrest. It all seemed surreal now, like something from a movie rather than real life. Fiona came out of the house, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. She had moved in with me a month earlier, tired of the commute from her apartment in town. She handed me a glass and sat down on the tailgate of the truck. "Thinking about the ice storm?" she asked. "Yeah, just reflecting on how crazy it all was. It was crazy, but you handled it perfectly. You did your job, you documented everything, and you let the system work. Patricia brought all of this on herself." I took a sip of the lemonade. I just keep thinking about what could have happened. If someone had been seriously hurt, or if the bridge had actually collapsed. But it did not. You did everything you could with the time you had. Nobody can ask more than that. She was right. I had done my job to the best of my ability under impossible circumstances. The failure was not mine. It was Patricia's, and she had paid the price for it. That evening, Harold Chen called me with some news. "Victor, the board voted to give you a bonus this year. $5,000, as a thank you for everything you did during the ice storm and for handling the whole situation with such professionalism." "That is generous. Thank you, Harold. We also want to put you under a longer contract, 5 years instead of the annual renewal. The board feels that having stability in our infrastructure maintenance is critical, and we want to make sure you are not going anywhere." I agreed to the terms, and we worked out the details over the next few days. The new contract included provisions for equipment parking, emergency response protocols, and a clear chain of command for winter weather events. Everything that should have been in place from the beginning. As summer turned to fall, I started preparing for the next winter season. I serviced the de-icing truck, restocked supplies, and reviewed my routes. When the first frost warning came in October, I was ready, and this time, nobody tried to have my truck towed. The winter that followed was actually pretty mild. We had a few snow events and one minor ice storm, but nothing like the previous January. Still, I treated every weather event with the same level of seriousness, knowing that preparation and vigilance were what kept people safe. In March, I got an invitation to speak at a state legislative hearing about HOA reform. I drove to Lansing and testified before a committee, telling the story of the ice storm and the bridge closure. The legislators listened intently, asked good questions, and thanked me for my testimony. 2 months later, the HOA Reform Act passed, creating new oversight mechanisms and requiring training for HOA board members. The law included specific protections for emergency equipment and essential services, directly inspired by what had happened in Willow Creek. Standing in the Capitol building after the bill's signing, watching the governor give a speech about the importance of common sense in community governance, I felt a sense of closure. Something good had come from that nightmare in January. Future HOA presidents would have to think twice before making decisions based on petty aesthetics instead of practical necessity. I drove home that evening as the sun was setting, taking the route across the newly repaired Cascade River Bridge. The structure was solid now, with upgraded support beams, new expansion joints, and improved drainage to prevent ice buildup. It was built to handle whatever winter could throw at it. As I crossed the bridge and entered Willow Creek, I passed the community entrance sign. Someone had updated it recently, adding a small plaque below the main sign that read, "A community of common sense." I smiled at that. It was a good motto, and one that had been earned through hard experience. Fiona was cooking dinner when I got home, and the smell of garlic and herbs filled the house. I told her about the bill signing, about the governor's speech, about the feeling of seeing something positive emerge from such a difficult situation. "You should be proud," she said, stirring a pot on the stove. "You stood up for what was right, even when it was hard, and you helped change things for the better." Later that night, lying in bed, I thought about the journey from that freezing January morning when I discovered my truck was gone to this moment of relative peace and normalcy. It had been a wild ride, full of frustration, anger, vindication, and ultimately, justice. The ice storm had exposed the fault lines in Willow Creek's governance, and Patricia Henderson had been the unwitting catalyst for necessary change. Her stubborn adherence to rules over reason had created a crisis, but that crisis had led to reform. Sometimes it takes a disaster to make people realize that change is needed. I never saw Patricia Henderson again after she moved away. I heard through the community grapevine that she relocated to Florida, probably hoping to escape the infamy that followed her in Michigan. I hoped she learned something from the experience, but I honestly did not spend much time thinking about it. She was the past, and I was focused on the future. The following January, almost exactly a year after the original ice storm, we got hit with another major winter weather event. This time, though, everything went smoothly. I had my truck prepped and ready. I started pretreatment at 4 in the morning before the first flake fell. I maintained the bridge and roads throughout the storm, and there were no accidents, no closures, and no crises. Harold Chen called me after the storm passed. "Victor, just wanted to say thank you. That was exactly how it is supposed to work. You were prepared, you stayed on top of it, and everyone stayed safe. This is what Patricia should have allowed you to do last year." "Just doing my job, Harold." But I appreciate the recognition. As winter progressed, I settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new HOA board was reasonable and professional. The residents appreciated the work I did, and the bridge stood strong, no longer a ticking time bomb but a well-maintained piece of infrastructure. In March, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Patricia Henderson. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was short and formal. She wrote that she was undergoing court-mandated counseling as part of her probation, and her therapist had suggested she write letters of apology to the people affected by her actions. She acknowledged that her decision to have my truck towed had been wrong, that she had let her ego and need for control override common sense and public safety. She did not ask for forgiveness, just stated that she was sorry. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. I appreciated the apology, even if it was court-mandated. It showed some level of self-awareness, which was more than I had expected from her. Spring arrived, bringing with it the annual HOA meeting where residents gathered to review the previous year and plan for the next. I attended as a vendor representative and was surprised when Harold called me up to the front of the room. "I want to take a moment to recognize Victor Ellsworth," he said, addressing the crowd. "Last year, during one of the most difficult winter weather events in recent memory, Victor went above and beyond to keep our community safe. Despite facing significant obstacles, he worked tirelessly to maintain our roads and bridge. His professionalism and dedication exemplify the kind of contractor we want to work with, and I am proud to announce that the board has voted to extend his contract for another 5 years." The room erupted in applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. I felt my face flush with embarrassment and pride. It was validation that all the hard work, all the sleepless nights, and all the stress had been worth it. After the meeting, residents came up to shake my hand and thank me personally. Many of them shared their own stories from that week in January. The long detours, the frustration, the fear when they heard the bridge might collapse. They talked about how angry they had been with Patricia, how relieved they were when she was removed from power, and how much better things were now. One elderly woman, Mrs. Alina Grant, grabbed my hand with both of hers. "Young man, you saved lives that week. I know it, and everyone here knows it. If that bridge had collapsed, or if someone had died in an accident because the roads were not treated, it would have been a tragedy. You prevented that. Do not ever forget it." Her words stayed with me. I had been so focused on the political drama, the investigation, and the aftermath that I had not fully processed what might have happened if things had gone differently. The bridge could have collapsed. Someone could have died in an accident on the icy roads. Emergency services could have been delayed getting to someone in critical need. Any of those scenarios would have been catastrophic, but none of them had happened. I had done my job, despite the obstacles, and people had stayed safe. That was what mattered. As summer settled over Willow Creek, life returned to normal. I spent my days maintaining equipment, planning for the next winter, and enjoying time with Fiona. We got engaged in July, a simple proposal on the bridge at sunset. She said yes, laughing and crying at the same time, and we started planning a fall wedding. The bridge had become a symbol for me, a reminder of both crisis and resilience. It had nearly failed, but it had held. It had been repaired and strengthened. It now stood as a testament to what could be accomplished when people worked together with common sense and mutual respect. In October, Fiona and I got married in a small ceremony at a park overlooking the Cascade River. Harold Chen officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. Many of the Willow Creek residents attended, and it felt less like a wedding and more like a community celebration. During his speech, Harold made a joke about HOA rules and regulations, and everyone laughed. It was a good laugh, the kind that comes from shared experience and healing. We had all been through something difficult together, and we had come out stronger on the other side. As I stood there with Fiona, looking out at the faces of our friends and neighbors, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. A crisis caused by bureaucratic pettiness had transformed into community reform and personal growth. Patricia Henderson's worst decision had inadvertently made Willow Creek a better place to live. The first snow of the season fell 3 weeks after our wedding. I was ready, truck prepped, and supplies stocked. As I drove through the quiet streets in the pre-dawn darkness, treating roads before most people woke up, I felt a deep sense of purpose and satisfaction. This was my job, my calling. I kept people safe during winter weather. I maintained critical infrastructure. And now, thanks to everything that had happened with Patricia Henderson and the ice storm, I had the full support of the community and a system in place to ensure it never happened again. The bridge was my first stop, as always. I treated it carefully, making sure every section got adequate coverage. The structure was solid beneath my truck, upgraded and reinforced, ready to handle whatever winter threw at it. As dawn broke over the Cascade River, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I finished my rounds and headed home. Fiona was awake, coffee brewing, breakfast on the stove. This was life now, simple and good, built on a foundation of hard-won wisdom and community trust. The ice storm and all its aftermath had taught me important lessons about standing up for what is right, about the importance of documentation and professionalism, and about how even the worst situations can lead to positive change. Patricia Henderson had tried to enforce petty rules at the worst possible time, and it had cost her everything. But in losing, she had inadvertently helped create something better. Willow Creek was no longer a community ruled by autocratic pettiness. It was a place where common sense prevailed, where residents were engaged, and where the bridge stood strong, connecting people to the wider world. And I was proud to play my part in keeping it that way, one winter storm at a time.